All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Baruch Kwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim, out here pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity, to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is the brother Quanawath come back at you, Lord will, with edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And, we are in the time, of great evils, right? There are going to be great evils that ultimately compass the entire world, right? As you read in Matthew, the 24th chapter, right, it gives you all a list of the different signs that we are to look for, right, as well as other places within the scriptures, right? Isaiah 29:6, 2nd Esdras 9:1, Joel 2:21, Acts 2:19, I think, if I'm not mistaken, right? We're given all these different signs to look forward, so that way we can understand and know, right, the times that we are in. Right, and we're seeing all these signs, right? We're seeing uproars of the people, right, in these different countries, right, based on, how their government is working, the different policies and whatnot that these governments are establishing. These people are rising up, right? We're seeing, the earthquakes, right? There was just recently another earthquake, that hit Mexico, right, at 7.4, right? And the aftershocks are 6.0s, 5.8s, right? You just recently had, a major back-to-back earthquake, over in Venezuela, and those numbers are still rising. We're seeing the earthquakes in diverse places. We're seeing the uproars of the peoples. We're seeing the pestilences, right? You got this new cyclospora, Cyrus, right, that's going around. The cases are jumping up, right, into the thousands, right? Almost, I think it's the last one I seen is, just in Detroit alone, Michigan, Detroit is like 3,000 cases, That's just in one state, right? So we're over, 10,000 cases, right, that have ultimately been reported here in America, right? You get this, Fanta with an H Cyrus, right, that was going around, the Ebola, And then recently I had seen, these fires, right, they're continuing to increase, right? Flames are devouring fires. Right, all these things are happening, but you read again in Matthew the 24th chapter, right, verse 8, it tells you that all these, right, are the beginning of sorrows, man. Right? These are the beginning of sorrows, man, meaning the times that are coming are going to be far greater and far more evil, than we see now. Matter of fact, let me start right here. This is in 2nd Esdras 14 and verse 16. It tells us that, right? It says, yet greater evils then those which thou hast seen happen shall be done hereafter. Meaning, again, as we see everything continue to increase, prices are increasing, right? The cost of living as a whole is going up for everybody here in America and really across the world, more so here in America, right? We see it getting worse, right? But that's just, again, that's just the beginning, right? The times that we're coming into, right, which we're in the beginning stages of it, right? We're in the beginning stages of Jacob's trouble, right? Also known as the hour of temptation in Revelation, the 3rd chapter, right? Which is to come across the whole world, right? Because you have Israelites that are scattered into the four corners of the earth, man, to all the different nations, And this is the time when the Lord, the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, through his only beloved begotten Son, Yahweh Shai, is going to try the faith of every single Israelite. Right? Really everyone. Right? We understand that only the elect of the nation of Israel is going to have faith. And Lord will, right, we be of that number. We're going to stand stiffly for the name of Yahweh Bashemel Shai in these times. And we're going to need that. Right? We're going to need our faith, right? Because as it says in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, right? Hebrews 11 and verse 6, it says, but without faith, it is impossible to please him. Meaning who? Please Yahweh Shai. It says, for he that cometh to the Most High must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him, right? And we need to be seeking Yahweh Bashim El Shai in these times, and it's imperative, right? It's imperative because, again, right, we see these evils increasing in the world, and they're only going to continue to get worse. You know? So we need to have faith in Yahweh Shai, right? Wa meaning and, right? Yahweh and Yahweh Shai. You know? So let me get back into the point that I wanted to grab, right? This is Jeremiah 30 and verse 5, because again, right, the evils, right, that are approaching, right, are far greater than what we see now, and they're going to eclipse any and every event that has ever taken place, you know, in history, right? Jacob's trouble, right, the peak of Jacob's trouble is going to eclipse, you know, even 70 AD, and we're going to grab, you know, just in the Josephus, you know, what 70 AD was like, you know, for you know, Israel, right, at the time. You know, this is Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 5. It says, "For thus saith the Lord Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua," says, "We have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace," right? Right? The Lord Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua, and if you haven't been paying attention, right, Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua is making it to where all these different peace deals and peace treaties and, you know, these different policies that will allow for, you know, some kind of reprieve or you know, some kind of solace, right? The Lord's not allowing it to go through, right? Just dealing with World War III. Hey, these peace deals and treaties that are happening, they're being constantly, you know, and ceasefires that are constantly being, you know, brought into the forefront, right? None of them have gone through, right? Not a single one has gone through, right? Because we're not in a time of peace, we're in a time of war. Not dealing with that at home right here in America, right? The Trump administration basically stopped, you know, or put a halt, right, to these ICE agents going and stopping these people, these, you know, basically these roadblocks, right? They went and put a halt on it, right? The Trump administration. Then here comes Trump sitting there saying, no, continue, right? And continue to, you know, to you know, pull these people over and get rid of these so-called immigrants, man, right? And the reason why that these halts were called is because you having these ICE officers killing these people, man, in these cars, and some of these people that are being killed are not the intended targets, you know. So it's like it's just showing you, you know, again, we are not in the time of any kind of, you know, peace, right? So it says, verse 6, it says, "Ask ye now, and see whether a man doth travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins, as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness," right? Showing you again that even these men, right, are going to be in straits, right? A man can't have a child, right? So you have to understand that he's, you know, in the ancient times, this is the best way that he can explain it, right? Because when a woman was having a child, she was in great pain and great suffering, right? Great pain and great suffering, you know? And so, you know, Jeremiah is ultimately seeing this, right? This vision that the Lord's given him, and he's seeing these men in straits, right? In a position of difficulty, right? Being scared, being in pain, right? For the situation that they are in, you know? This is the time that we're coming into. So even these mightiest men, or these so-called top G's, or whatever, you know, these people extol in the world, even they're going to be in straits, right? Because we understand that the men of the Lord, right, are going to be applying the scriptures, right? When trouble ultimately hits, what? They're going to trust and believe in Yahweh Bashim El Shai. They're not going to make haste in the time of trouble. You read in Sirach, the 2nd chapter, right? They're not going to trust in man. They're going to trust in Yahweh Bashim El Shai. So this isn't talking about a man of the Lord, right? It's talking about these everyday men that are out here, you know, these worldly ass men, these carnal men that are out here, you know? All these doomsday preppers and whatnot, right? Talking about how, you know, you got to prepare for what's coming. It doesn't matter how much or how, you know, how long they take to prepare, you know, or the things that they do, right? Scriptures say that a mighty man is not delivered by his much strength, you know. So at the end of the day, right, you know, you being delivered into a situation and delivered out of a situation, hey, that's up to Yahweh Bashim El Shai. right? Verse 7 here being the point. It says, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. Matthew 24:21, it says that there's like a time that has never been before, right? It says, it is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it, right? Jacob's trouble, right? Meaning you Israelites, right? Because we understand that Jacob's, got his name changed, right? From Jacob to Israel, right? Yasharallah, right? So ultimately, Jacob and Israel are synonymous one with another, right? So this is a time in which the nation of Israel is going to be in straight perplexity and distress, right? And again, we're starting to see that, right? With these ICE agents coming around, with the, Esau coming after, because right now you got the ICE agents and whatnot coming after the northern tribes. But even now you got these younger Edomite boys, right? Basically drowning. I mean, they're men really, but they're drowning Jake, You're fighting Jake, and I did a lesson on it, right? You got these Edomites, right, basically taking Jake out to the water and drowning him. All this is happening and taking place, and again, who is it against? It's against you Israelites, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. But again, it's going to continue to get worse, right? You got prices going up. Right, the supply is not coming into America, which means the supply here in America, right, is dwindling, which means the cost is going up, right? Interest rates are high still. Like the cost of living in general is going up, man. So you best believe the time that we're coming into a time of famines. We're coming into a time, of heightened crime, right? Greater evils, right? And when you read, again, as we get into it, right, when you read into the Josephus, right, the time that our people were facing at that time in 70 AD, that was bad, man. Matter of fact, let's jump to this real quick. In Luke, Luke 21 and verse 20, right? It says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh, right? And again, this is speaking about 70 AD, right? When the Romans, right, ultimately went to, with, Titus, right? The emperor of Rome at the time, right? Went to go besiege, Jerusalem, right? They ultimately, basically laid a siege in Jerusalem, right? Surrounded, Jerusalem, knocking down all the trees, right? Killing all the animals, right, locking them in there, It says, then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto, right? For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled, right? But woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. Again, and this is talking about 70 AD, right? Let's grab it, right? This is in the Josephus, right? Book 6, chapter 10. It says, how great many of the people earnestly endeavored to desert to the Romans, right? You had people that were, basically, being traitors, right? Giving themselves up over to the Romans. You had a lot of Israelites that were doing that, right? It says, as also what intolerable things those that stayed behind suffered by famine and the sad consequences thereof, man. And we're not going to read too much of this. We're just going to read a little bit. It's pretty fire, man, as far as like it going into detail, of what, Israel was going through, right? So I'll start at 1. It says, as Josephus was speaking thus with a loud voice, the seditious would neither yield to what he said, nor did they deem it safe for them to alter their conduct. But as for the people,
they had a great inclination to desert to the Romans. Accordingly, some of them sold what they had, even the most precious things that had been laid up as treasures by them, for every small matter, and swallowed down pieces of gold that they might not be found out by the robbers. And when they had escaped to the Romans, went to stool. I mean, they basically pooped it out, right? It says, and had wherewithal to provide plentifully for themselves. For Titus let a great number of them go away into the country, whither they pleased. And the main reasons why they were so ready to desert were these: that now they should be freed from those miseries which they had endured in that city, and yet should not be in slavery to the Romans. However, John and Simon, with their factions, did more carefully watch these men's going out than they did the coming in of the Romans. And if any one but did afford the least shadow of suspicion of such an intention, his throat was cut immediately. So if you were going to basically desert and go to the Romans, you were basically killed. Right? It says, but as for the richer sort, it proved all one to them whether they stayed in the city or attempted to get out of it, for they were equally destroyed in both cases. For every such person was put to death under this pretense that they were going to desert, but in reality the robbers might get what they had, right? So there was crime, right, that was increased, right, within the city, right? And we understand that crime is increasing here, right? You got up in Portland, Oregon. I had watched a video earlier, right, that there's only about 41 cops that they have, on the payroll, right, for the whole city of Portland, right? And we're talking about crime is at an all-time high, right? You got people, a dude was basically running around naked, trying to snatch up people's kids, and it took the cops around 40 minutes to an hour to even get there to help him, right? They're in such short staffed, or defunding of the police, right? Crime is increasing drastically, right? And it's not just in Portland, Oregon, it's across the board, right? It says, right? It says, for every such person was put to death under this pretense that they were going to desert, but in reality the robbers might get what they had. The madness of the seditious did also increase together with their famine, and both those miseries were every day inflamed more and more, meaning everything continued to get worse and continue to get worse, continue to grow, right? It says, for there was no corn which anywhere appeared publicly, but the robbers came running into and searched men's private houses, and then, if they found any, they tormented them, because they had denied they had any. And if they found none, they tormented them worse, because they supposed they had more carefully concealed it. The indication they made use of whether they had any or not was taken from the bodies of these miserable wretches, which, if they were in good case, they supposed they were in no want at all of food. But if they were wasted away, they walked off without searching any further, nor did they think it proper to kill such as these, because they saw that they would very soon die of themselves for want of food. Right? Again, this is showing you, right? This right here is 2nd Esdras, the 16th chapter, right? Starting at verse 2nd Esdras 15, and starting at verse we'll start at verse 14. It says, woe to the world and them that dwell therein. And this is future prophecy, right? This is what's ultimately going to come, right? It says, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall fight, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands, right? So they're going in there and killing people, man, right? It says, for there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, in the course of their actions shall stand in their power. So this is what's going, this is what is, was happening and taking place right back in 70 AD, right? When the siege ultimately hit, and the supplies, right, ultimately started, because there's ultimately a war against the people, right? The government has waged war, right? Really, Esau, Edom, right? The elites has waged war against the people. You know, and there's a whole bunch of food recalls, right? People are being scared like to eat certain foods, right? Those foods are being recalled, right? Supplies are not coming in, right? From China or anywhere else, right? You got this El Nino, right, going on. You got these different hurricanes and stuff like that that are happening and taking place. And we understand that Esau has his hand in a lot of this, right? He has his hand in a lot of these, you know, because he's got his harp machine, right, going around and doing these different things. He's got his dues, right, direct energy weapons that he sends down, and he causes these fires and all these different explosions on these different refineries that are happening, these different, you know, food processing plants, right, these different trains, right, these derailments and so on and so forth, right? A lot of this Esau has his hand in, right? As the scriptures say, right, if misery come upon thee, thou shalt find it. If adversity, it's like if adversity come upon thee, thou shalt find him there first. That's in Sirach, the 12th chapter, around the 17th and 18th verse. Right? So this devil has his hand in a lot of these things, man. Right? So there's ultimately been a war, right, that is being waged on the masses. You know, and again, a lot of these people are being affected heavily. We're all being affected heavily, right, by Esau's, you know, war that he's waging. Right, affecting the food supply, right, affecting, you know, the water supply, right. Water is being taken. You know, you got BG, you right, kill Gates, right. That is ultimately but he bought up all the water. Right now, water is being monetized. Right now, water is being put, you know, on the stock market, right, for people to be able to purchase. You know, again, showing you what is going on, man. Right? And what's going to happen? That's going to lead to these people being put in a position of distress, in a position of, you know, being, you know, to where they have to, you know, rob and steal, right, in order to, you know, get any kind of ends meet, right? Food, water, right? I said, a man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able, right? Because of all the crime that's going on, man. Right? You might lose your life just trying to go and try to find some type of food, you know? And not only that, right? We're already seeing these roadblocks. We're seeing these curfews being set up as the crime continues to, you know, increase, you know? It says, because of their pride, the city shall be troubled, the houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid. A man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall destroy their houses with the sword and spoil their goods because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation. And see, this right here, right, as we're reading, was only just the beginning stages of it. You know, we'll continue to read, right? It says at the very end of the number 2 paragraph at the top, it says, many there were indeed who sold what they had for one measure, it was of wheat, if they were of the richer sort, but of barley if they were poor. Because, right, barley was ultimately a cheaper way, right, to make bread. Right? It was a cheaper wheat, if you will. Right? It says, when these had so done, they shut themselves up in the inmost rooms of their houses and ate the corn that they had gotten. Some did it without grinding it, by reason of the extremity of want they were in. And others baked bread of it, according as necessity and fear dictated to them. A table was nowhere laid for a distinct meal, but they had snatched the bread out of the fire half baked and ate it hastily. They were starving, man. They were starving. It says it was now a miserable case and a sight that would justly bring tears into our eyes. How men stood as to their food, while the more powerful had more than enough, and the weaker were lamenting for want of it. And see, this is exactly what's going on here, right? You got the rich, right, that are basically taking all the food, they're taking the water, right? And these people out here, right, are ultimately what? Right? They're people are starting to feel that pressure more and more, right? And people are able to afford less, right? You got more of these shelves that are becoming bare. I think I might have even pulled it up on like the news breakup. I had it pulled up a while ago. Let me see. Let's see. I had it pulled up. It might have been on the Smart News. Let's see. I guess nah. Hold on. Right here. It says food shortages are already here. Right? The government needs to tell us the truth, man. And this is, really speaking about, the UK and, you know, and stuff like that. But we're seeing that here, right? It says, if you know where to look, there are signs everywhere of how food insecure Britain is become. A good place to start is in the supermarket aisles where you watch people peer at the label, wince, and move on. For staples, bread, milk, eggs, meat particularly is becoming an unaffordable treat, right? Just regular food, right? Supermarkets have long ago mastered the art of the magician's stealth when it comes to shelf illusion and moving displays around. Nudging consumers into rethinking choices for years, they will be one of the last places that admits there is a problem. Right? British consumers are becoming numb to the use of cardboard displays, as well as a bombardment of random products that are in stock at the front entrance to shops. But look closely enough and you will see their sleight of hand. Shelves are becoming emptier and supply is certainly more volatile. Right? So there you go. Right? The supply is going down, which means prices are going up, right? And people are going to become, scarce. People are going to become, more antsy, they're gonna have more anxiety, more stress, right? And eventually it's gonna lead to the uprising of these people, man. Right? Pursuing to Job 20 and was that 22, right? In the fullness of their sufficiency, right? The hand of the wicked shall come upon them. And when you go into that word wicked, it goes back to laborer, right? The everyday laborer, right, is going to rise up against these people, man, against their government. And it's gonna be every man for himself, right? It says, but the famine was too hard for all. Right there. It says, but the famine was too hard for all other passions. It is destructive to nothing so much as to modesty, for what was otherwise worthy of reverence was in this case despised, insomuch that children pulled the very morsels that their fathers were eating out of their mouths. And what was still more to be pitied, so did the mothers do as to their infants. And when those that were most dear were perishing under their hands, they were not ashamed to take from them the very last drops that might preserve their lives, right? Scriptures tell you that friends shall find one another like enemies. People that have known each other, friends, family, right? It doesn't matter, right? It says, and while they ate after this manner, yet were they not concealed in doing so. But the seditious everywhere came upon them immediately and snatched away from them what they had gotten from others. For when they saw people fighting over food, right? It says, for when they saw any house shut up, this was to them a signal that the people within had gotten some food. Whereupon they broke open the doors and ran in and took pieces of what they were eating almost up out of their very throats. And this was by force, right? The old men who held their food fast were beaten, and if the women hid what they had within their hands, their hair was torn for doing so. Nor was there any commiseration shown either to the aged or to the infants, but they lifted up children from the ground as they hung upon the morsels they had gotten, and shook them down upon the floor. But still they were more barbarously cruel to those that had prevented their coming in, and had actually swallowed down what they were going to seize upon, as if they had been unjustly defrauded of their right. They also invented terrible methods of torment to discover where any food was, and they were these to stop up the passages of the privy parts of the miserable wretches, and to drive up sharp stakes up their fundaments, meaning through their private parts and stuff like that. And a man was forced to bear what it is terrible even to hear, in order to make him confess that he had but one loaf of bread, or that he might discover a handful of barley meal that was concealed. And this was done when these tormentors were not themselves hungry, right? They're hungry, right? They were starving, right? Again, and we're seeing these famines coming upon America, man. You know? So what do you think is going to happen? If this would happen in 70 AD, right? When people were starting to, when supply was low, demand was high, people are hungry, crime was, continuing to go up, right? What do you think is going to happen in these times, man? When the Lord's saying, we were just reading it, it's going to be far worse. But it's like far worse than what we're reading now, right? It says, for the thing had been less barbarous and had necessity forced them to it. But this was done to keep their madness in exercise, and as making preparation and provisions for themselves for the following days. These men were also to meet those that had crept out of the city by night as far as the Roman guards, to gather some plants and herbs that grew wild. And when those people thought they had got clear of the enemy, they snatched from them what they had brought with them, even while they had frequently entreated them, and that by calling upon the tremendous name of the Most High, to give them back some part of what they had brought, though these would not give them the least crumb, and they were to be well contented that they were only spoiled and not slain at the same time, right? And it's heavy, and it continues on, right? Just again going into what was happening, right, on the inside. Right, that's not even talking about, to some of those that had escaped. Hey, the Romans came and killed them, right? Slaughtered them, used them as examples, right? You could pause the screen and read, just some of these things that, had taken place. It was a gruesome time, man. A very gruesome time. And this right here should ultimately, put fear within you, right? Because again, we're coming into these times and they're going to be far worse than what we're reading now, right? Far worse than what we're reading now, man. And you got to repent, right? You got to turn to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, before it's too late, right? 2 Ezra 16. In verse 17, this is, woe is me, who will deliver me in those days, right? The beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, and the power shall stand in fear, the beginning of evils. What shall I do when these evils shall come, right? So what are you people going to do? When all hell breaks loose, when this situation that we're currently in, continues to grow and become worse, right? And the food becomes scarce, and the water becomes scarce, right? You lose your job. What are you people going to do, right? The only thing you can do is lean upon Yahweh and Yahweh Shai, the Heavenly Father Yahweh and His only begotten Son Yahweh Shai. Right? Because we understand that in these times, we read it in Jeremiah 30 and verse 7, right? But he shall be saved out of it. That's talking about the elect of the nation of Israel. Right? The Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai is going to ultimately sustain, right, the elect of the nation of Israel. Right? Let's go ahead and grab it. Right? It's Isaiah chapter 65. And we'll start at verse 12. It says, therefore, will I number you to the sword? And that sword is symbolic, right, for the many different forms of judgment that Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai is going to bring. Famine being one of them, right? Pestilence being one of them, right? Esau coming in like a flood and using that sword, right? Just like in 70 AD. When you had the Romans, right, compassing Jerusalem about, and you had Israelites that were being, killed, right? And then again, you have what? The insurrection, right? The sedition of men, right? Where people were being killed. So there's many different forms of judgment that the Lord is going to bring upon, really the world, right? And really those who are wicked, those who are evil, right? Therefore will I number you to the sword, and ye shall all bow down to the slaughter, right? What we just read was slaughter, right? Because when I called, you did not answer. When I spake, you did not hear, but did evil before mine eyes, and did choose that wherein I delighted not, right? So you want to continue to follow in the ways of the world. You want to continue to be wicked. You want to continue to be evil. And with the Lord, Yahweh Shem El Shai is going to put you to death, right? But see, the Lord is going to preserve his elect, right? Scriptures say he hath care for his elect, right? That's Wisdom of Solomon 3:9, right? It says, verse 13, it says, matter of fact, I want to grab that real quick, right? Wisdom of Solomon 3 and verse 9, it says, they that put their trust in him, right? And who? In Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, shall understand truth, and such as be faithful in love shall abide with him. For grace and mercy is to his saints, and he hath care for his elect, right? So the elect, right, are ultimately going to be preserved in these times, right? Isaiah 65 and verse 13, right? This is that preserving, right? Isaiah 65:13. Therefore, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushua, behold, my servants shall eat, right? As we read, right, in the Josephus, right, you had people that were dying, people were starving, But see, the Lord saying that what? My elect are going to eat, right? It says, behold, my servants shall eat, but ye shall be hungry, right? Meaning 2/3 of our people here in America and the wicked Israelites scattered abroad, right? You're going to be fucking hungry. You're going to be starving, right? You're going to want food, but you're not going to get it, right? It says, behold, my servants shall drink, but ye shall be thirsty, right? The elect of the nation of Israel are going to drink, right? They're going to be hydrated. And that's the spirit, right? The phone had a chime on that, But hey, guess what? The wicked of our people, right, are going to be thirsty, in both the literal and spiritual sense, because they're not going to have this fountains of living water, which is his word, right? So spiritually, you're going to be dehydrated, right? And physically, you're going to be dehydrated, man. It says, behold, my servants shall rejoice, but ye shall be ashamed. Behold, my servants shall sing for joy of heart, but ye shall cry for sorrow of heart, and shall howl for vexation of spirit, man. Right? You people are going to be in great distress. Right? We just read that there was going to be distress upon the people. Which we're seeing that distress, right, starting to come upon you people, but it's going to be far worse in the times to come. It's going to be far worse, man. You people are going to be in fucking straits like no other. Right? But again, the elect of the nation of Israel is going to be protected, man. Let me grab this, man, and we'll close as is Job chapter 5 and verse 19, right? Speaking to the elect, right? It says, he shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7 there shall no evil touch thee, right? In the last 2 major prophecies, right? Jacob's trouble, the hour of temptation, right? And in the noisome pestilence, right? Which is those ICBM nuclear missiles being shot off, right? The fullness of World War III. The Lord's going to deliver the elect of the nation of Israel out of all of it, right? It says right here, verse 20, it says, in famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. Thou shalt be hid from the scourge of the tongue, neither shalt thou be afraid of destruction when it cometh. At destruction and famine thou shalt laugh, neither shalt thou be afraid of the beasts of the earth. For thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with thee. So, hey, ultimately, Yahweh Shem Shai is going to make sure that we're sustained in every aspect, man. Meaning that we're going to be protected, right? We're going to eat, we're going to drink, right? And we're going to know that Yahweh Shem Shai has our back, Because in the times to come, right, it's going to be every man and his faith. And without faith, it is impossible to please Yahweh Shem Shai. So get this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding right now, and prove your faith to Yahweh Shem Shai. Faith without works is dead. That's the bottom line, man. But with that, Lord will, it was edifying. Lord will, it was straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachak Kodash, double honor to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Till next time, I say Shalom.